Immunity is the ability to fight infection, illness, and disease. It is our ability to respond to pathogens and to destroy them, or when we can't destroy them, to wall them off. Now, a pathogen is any disease-causing agent. It is bacteria, viruses, parasites. Those are all certainly pathogens. But our immune system also can treat things like pollen, wood, and other foreign objects as pathogens, and will even treat our own cells, abnormal cells, as pathogens as well. One of the reasons, in fact, for the MHC protein or protein complex that we discussed with the T cell development is to help us identify the difference between self cells that are healthy and self cells that may be carrying a virus, infected with a virus, or that may be cancerous. There are two mechanisms of the immune system. They work independently, but they also work together. There's a lot of crossover between these two processes. The first is the innate, which is non-specific. I really want you to pay attention to this term non-specific. Another way of saying non-specific would be to say non-selective. The innate immune system is quite broad, and we're going to look at how that broad protection can help us out and keep us safe. Then we have the adaptive immune system, or the acquired immune system, and it is incredibly specific and selective, and so we'll have a chance to discuss that too. Looking at the innate immune system first, we've got a pretty long list of things that are part of the innate immune system, and we can take a look at this list, kind of just study it, but I want to point out a few things that are important, some more than others. One of the things that is characteristic of the innate immune system is that it's present at birth. It's actually where the word innate comes from, from birth. Infants are protected by this system. It is incredibly nonspecific, and it does not distinguish one type of threat from another. So if a pathogen invades, for example, my phagocytes, shown here, will phagocytose that pathogen, and that's true whether it's a bacteria or a virus or a piece of pollen or a splinter of wood. It's going to digest that. Now, obviously, size is a limitation, so it's not going to digest, for example, the entire splinter, but it certainly can digest cells, or I should say ingest. Digest suggests something slightly different. So ingest these cells and break them down. There are physical barriers to the innate immune system, and that's going to be our skin, our mucous membranes. We'll talk a little more about that in a second. Our phagocytes, which digest or ingest the pathogen or engulf the pathogen, or debris. This includes cellular debris from cells that have died. So you might remember the T cells that I mentioned die by apoptosis or programmed cell death. Other cells that die because they're virally infected or they're damaged for some reason, the phagocytes are going to destroy those. Part of the innate immune system is something called immune surveillance. This one is actually interesting. These natural killer cells we'll talk about them in more detail. These natural killer cells are kind of a crossover. If you were to really consider them, they're kind of right there in the middle between the innate and the acquired immune system. There are these in-between cells, but we're going to classify them as part of the innate system, and we'll look at how they work, because they definitely are more broad than the acquired, but they're more specific than the rest of the innate immune system. Then we have interferons, which are chemicals to protect against viral infections. Complement proteins, we're going to talk about those. These are proteins that circulate and help with the antibodies. And then we've got the release of chemical messengers that trigger inflammation. That is a characteristic of the innate immune system. That's kind of an interesting one. Most people, the uninitiated, the people who have not had physiology or been taught about the innate system, think that inflammation is caused by the bacteria, but that's not true at all. Bacteria don't cause inflammation. Viruses don't cause inflammation, at least not directly. It's not in the bacteria's best interest to be discovered by the immune system, and inflammation would, in fact, cause it to be discovered. Our own cells actually trigger the inflammation by releasing chemical messengers. For example, you can see right here, this mast cell is part of that process. It's not the only cell that's involved, but it's part of that process. And likewise, fever, that is caused by our own cells. Some of the chemical messengers that are released from our own cells will travel to the brain to cause us to have a fever. Now, the adaptive immunity, much more specific, much more selective. And then here's the thing. This specific resistance, though, okay, it's great protection, but it takes 7 to 10 days before our adaptive defenses ramp up. So if we've never been exposed to that particular type of pathogen, we're a little bit at the mercy of chance events. We need those lymphocytes to discover the pathogen and to become activated and generate a response. And those things can take time. And sometimes they don't happen. We're going to look at this in more detail and discuss the acquired immune system, everything that it does, how it works, and so forth.